Frank Reich, welcome to Sports Spectrum. It's so good to see you.
Thanks, Jason. Great to join you, and great to be part of Sports Spectrum again. It's been years.
It has. I was looking in the archives in the old 1990s magazines that we have on file, and there was a few articles done on Frank Reich when he was a Bills quarterback. So I'm glad that we can rekindle the friendship, if you will.
For sure. Glad to be on and support the efforts.
Absolutely. So, as you know, Sports Spectrum has always been about the intersection of sports and faith, and we like to start our conversations here on the podcast about faith, about Jesus. So, let's start there. Tell me about Christ right now in the life of Coach Frank Reich.
It's at the center and has always been at the center. You know, my relationship with Christ is a centerpiece, and really whatever stage that I've been in my career path, you can look at it and you say, well, you went from playing and then I was in ministry and then I did some business things. But I like when I get into deep conversations with people and we are sharing each other's journeys, it's always been an attempt to live out my faith in Christ in whatever venue I've been in, player, coach, ministry, business, family. I've just always believed that you can't create this dichotomy, my spiritual life, and then here's my, life in the world. It's always been about trying to intersect that and make it the centerpiece.
Can you share a little bit of your testimony and when that faith started?
Yeah. I grew up in a family, I'll give you the short version, grew up in a family that really emphasized faith, family, country, sport, school, all that stuff. Parents are school teachers and always taught me the right things about, having a Christ-centered life. But then, like many people, it just didn't really register. I went to church every week but I really didn't come to a point of decision in my life until my senior year in college. And where essentially, I had waited for a number of years as Boomer Esiason's backup, became the starter, then got injured. Looked like all those dreams were going down the tubes. And it was really then that campus chaplain had been sharing the gospel with me. And it was during that time that I accepted Christ.
And you didn't look back. I wonder how that helped you as you acclimated into a professional career where you were so known as the guy who would come in, but a backup in many cases and always staying ready. I've seen this in basketball and other sports where they call it the stay ready group, right? Where you might not get time, you might not be playing at all, but you got to stay ready. And you kind of developed into that role pretty quickly when you got to the NFL. But let's talk about the faith aspect of that and how that kind of helped you early in your professional career.
Well, it's interesting, even as I think back to my journey to, where I came to a point of decision, that I think I'm always still trying to learn, the difference between working out our salvation and understanding it's all by grace, because I was brought up by two parents who meant work ethic was everything. We got to grind it out and work hard. And so I always somehow believed, like a lot of people, I think, fall into the trap of believing that, I thought God graded on a curve and, I'm going to do just enough I don't know if I'm going to get a B, or a C, but I'm pretty sure I'm not going to get a F.
Right.
And I think I'll pass. And, but it wasn't really until I understood that God doesn't grade on a curve, that he requires a score of 100%. So, and of course we get zero. We can't get any of that, but Jesus did score 100%. He lived a perfect life. And then, so my faith in him, is really what gives us the score, and that's received by grace. It's not anything I did to deserve it. So I just think that is an important backdrop to your question because there's one of my favorite Bible passages, 1 Corinthians, 15:10, that says something to the effect of, that it's our faith in Christ that compels us to kind of work out, to kind of give our best.
Mm.
And then Paul goes on to say, yeah, but I'm giving I'm giving my best, but it's still by grace. It's by grace. So this stay ready thing that you referenced to, Jason, has always been about that. It's always been an understanding of, um, by grace we've been given what we've been given, but we have to be good stewards of that. We have to work that out. We have to develop that. God has called us to develop and grow in these areas. And so what better way is there to grow than always have to be on the edge of your seat?
Mm.
And be ready for that challenge. So I just found that was, and then when you look at the Bible and Jesus is saying, hey, be ready. You never know when is he going to come? You're always ready. I don't
Yeah.
know when the day or the hour or the return of his return is. Stay ready. Well, how long is it? I don't know. Just stay ready. It's good. Well, when am I going to get a chance to actually play and not just be the backup quarterback? I don't know. Just be ready. Well, when
Yeah.
am I going to get a chance to be the head coach? Is that ever going to happen? I don't know. Stay ready.
Mm.
Um, the staying ready part just is a very fertile ground for God, I think, to do some pretty cool things.
So I'm jumping around here because I'm going to go back. I really want to go through a little bit more on your career, but it just made me think when you say stay ready, like right now, what does stay ready look like right now? Because this is the first time you haven't coached or been in the NFL, as far as I know, since 2006.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about that time you were in ministry too, because I think that's really fascinating. But what does stay ready look like right now? Maybe both in your faith and, professionally.
Yeah, well, that's a great question. That's the $64,000 question, and it is. I really think that's a great observation by you, and that's the mode that I am in. And what is next? And is it go back into coaching? Is it go into full-time ministry? Is it some hybrid of doing something? Um, that is that I don't know the answer to that, but I just know I want to be ready. So I'm going
Yeah.
to stay ready. So what does that look like? I've told people have said to me, Frank, what are you doing? And I said, I'm focusing on intimacy. Intimacy is a kind of the big word for me in this stage. Intimacy with Christ, being close to him, and intimacy with my wife, of 38 years. Working in football is 100 plus hours a week as a coach. So a lot of pull and strain there. So just having a chance to spend more time with my wife, with my family, children and grandchildren,
Yeah.
and take that opportunity. And then quote unquote career wise, I pretty much said, Jason, I'm probably going to take a year to not rush into anything and almost force myself to take a year and not jump into and say yes to, opportunities. And there have been several things put before me that could be really good opportunities, but just wanted to take a year and just say, hey, let's just reconnect and stay ready.
No, that's good.
Because I think, at 62, if I end up retiring from coaching and if my coaching career is over and if life in the NFL is over, it's been 30 plus years. It's been amazing, but like I'm only 62. That's young. And
Yes.
that, I got, God willing, 20 years, 15, 20 years of being somewhat productive. Am I going to work 100 plus hours a week? No, I'm probably not going to do that anymore. You know what I mean? That probably is not going to be in the equation. Um, but whatever it is, I still want to be productive.
Yeah, that's good. He is Frank Reich. He's joining us here on Sports Spectrum. So let's go back a minute. I know we're kind of bouncing around here, but I'm really fascinated by your career with the Bills spiritually. What was that like as far as growing in your faith? And who were some of the people, the spiritual leaders, including yourself, obviously, but others that were able to pour into you, that were able to help you, maybe even disciple you in growing in your faith while you were a player?
Yeah, well, first it was the chaplain there, Fred Rains, who was there the whole time I was there, just a dear friend and great mentor to me in so many ways that I can't even begin to count the ways that he's just been a faithful minister of the gospel to me, always challenging me, always challenging me to grow and putting me in position to do that. But, there were also, guys on that team that were real strong in the faith. An older player when I first got there was Jerry Butler. He was
Yeah.
very outspoken about his Christian faith, and that was really new to me. When he got up, he stood up in a team meeting and said, "Let's pray." I was like, "What?" It was, we were in a players only meeting, and it was about to be one of these knockdown, drag out meetings, and he's talking about praying, and I was all into it, but I just never had seen anybody that bold before. And then many of my teammates there had a really Don Beebe, Pete Metzlars, Carlton Bailey. There's so many, guys who were serious about their faith. And we kind of grew up together, under Fred Rains's leadership.
I love that, because I think that's a good parallel to where you see guys today. And we have a lot of athletes and players certainly on this podcast who talk about that, like talk about the foundation being built, because a lot of guys I think struggle with, okay, it's football and I have to kind of put my faith to the side. And I've seen the NFL, especially specific teams, do a really great job on keeping that together and allowing for opportunities to grow spiritually. And it sounds like early in your career that was new, but by the end, when you got towards the end, what did that look like for you?
Yeah, I think it's always been an effort to kind of keep it connected and keep fertile ground, understanding that, first of all, as a player, I always knew that for me to play my best football, that was going to happen when I was most intimate with Christ, and that when I couldn't, to try to separate that out would take away from my play on the field. I mean, I could give a million examples of that, but I just always knew I was a better player when I was in an environment where I was with brothers and we understood that, sure, we were playing football, but we were doing it in a way that, we're trying to grow and in our relationship with God, trying to give glory to him by the way we played, by the way we acted, how we handled victory, how we handled defeat,
Yeah.
all those things. So as that career went on in playing and coaching, you got to see how it wasn't the same everywhere. Buffalo was great, and there were some other places that I was playing and coaching that were great, and had a great, I got to, in coaching, got to work under Tony Dungy, so there was still plenty of opportunity. He really provided a great environment to grow spiritually.
So there's really this pivot moment for you that I'm fascinated by when you finish your career after the 98 season. And then you don't really start coaching. You talked about Coach Dungy, I believe, until 2006. So there's an 8-year period there. And you mentioned earlier, you kind of alluded to it about ministry and about business. I'm really fascinated by the ministry side of what that looked like for you, where your head was in terms of your mind making that decision to go into ministry. When did you start thinking about that? Was it while you were still playing that you kind of knew where the Lord might have been gearing you towards?
Yeah, I'd say it was towards the end. Played 14 years, and I'd say it was, well, one of the things I probably should have said when we talk about those Buffalo years, and I'll just say it briefly, is if I said, well, what characterized those Buffalo years spiritually as much as anything for me personally, and it was a real commitment to be in the Word and to read the Bible and to just not try to become some scholar, but just be committed to reading it, to getting to know the Lord Jesus through the reading of the Word, to have that discipline to do that. So as I began to do that for years and years, it started changing my life radically, like in a lot of ways. And so towards the end of my career, as a pro athlete, you're getting opportunities to go speak to youth groups and father-son breakfasts. And what are you doing? You're sharing your testimony, about how you came to faith in Christ. And that was great. But later in my career, I felt this pulling to do more than that. my parents were school teachers. I was wired to be a teacher. So the Bible was changing my life. So I was looking for, I was telling Fred Rains, our chaplain, hey, I not only want to go to this place and share the gospel, can I share how this passage, changed my life,
Mm.
and how I view things and how I view playing football different because of this passage. Um, and so I wanted to teach the Bible. So that's what I ended up going to seminary. I started seminary while I was still playing, only took a couple classes. Um, and then when I retired, I essentially had those 8 years where I was almost became like an itinerant preacher and was traveling the country, speaking, teaching, at the same time taking seminary classes. And that gradually kept ramping up and ramping up. And then I eventually got my degree. Of course, I also ended up going to work at the seminary. That's a whole other crazy story, but I did that for 3 years. And I just felt a real fulfillment, and I felt it was a very important part of my life and my journey that um, that I would devote to ministry. And part of it was being able to devote to my family. I played 14 years. I kind of had this pull that I knew I wanted to coach, but I wasn't sure what to do with that.
Mm.
And I knew if I went into coaching, it was going to be 100 hours a week. My children were young, and I just wasn't sure if I was ready to make a commitment to 100 hours a week and not see my children. And because I had played for 14 years, I was at a position that I didn't make a ton of money, but I made enough money that I could do that. So that was essentially what we did.
So who is the person, or what were the conversations that took place to say, okay, yep, I think this is the time. God's steering me into coaching here. I guess it was 2006.
It was actually the pastor of a church I was going to, Pastor Harry Reeder, who's no longer with us, but he was a real mentor to me in Charlotte. He pastored a very big church, Christ Covenant, in Charlotte, and he was kind of a man's man, and he was quite an athlete himself. And I went to him at a very critical time, and I said, Pastor, I've been doing full-time ministry for 8 years, 7, 8 years. I do feel, I've always felt this call to be a coach. My dad was a coach. My mom was a coach. I've always thought Bill Polian, great general manager, always told me, Frank, you need to get into coaching. He's like a football father to me.
Yeah.
Um, all my coaches, all my teammates, everyone would say, Frank, you need to be a coach. You need to be a coach. And so I went to him and I said, I feel guilty. Like if I leave the quote unquote ministry, am I letting God down? I
Mm.
mean, am I failing God by doing that? And he looked at, and I said, I feel like I'm at this fork in the road, and I got to decide: do I need to go all out full-time ministry, or should I go into coaching? And he said to me, Frank, you're looking at this all wrong. You're at a fork in the road. He said, this happens to, he said, I get this a lot, but what I'll tell you is what I tell many people. It doesn't, as long as you're seeking to grow in Christ and to glorify him in all that you do, it doesn't matter which way you go. So if you feel a pull into coaching, that is your ministry, and so that really helped free me up, to move forward into the coaching arena.
Yeah, and it's Tony Dungy, who's your first teacher as a
Yeah.
coach. That's not a bad person to learn from, especially from a faith perspective.
Yeah, no, that's right. And Bill Polian, who was the general manager there at the time, helped me get my foot in the door with Coach Dungy, and that was a great way to start my coaching career.
Yeah, you mentioned Polian, Coach or Bill Polian. When I was working at ESPN, he was working on a show called NFL Insiders when we were working together, and I would sit in those meetings, and so would the other 12 people, and we'd all just go like this and put our hand on our our head on our hand and look at Bill Polian and listen, and he would just go for 20 minutes, and he would share stories, which is beautiful, right, from a perspective of just listening. But my gosh, did that guy have so much knowledge about football? And you said he was your football Would you say your
He was
football
like a
father?
football father to me. Pretty much everywhere where I was, he drafted me to the Buffalo Bills. He signed me as a free agent to the Carolina Panthers, and helped me get my foot in the door coaching, and then obviously when I became a head coach, those teams are calling him and he's calling them, asking him for what his thoughts. And so I like to tell the story. I was after my rookie season in 1985. Bill Polian said to me, "Frank, you're going to be a head coach in the NFL one day." And he said, "I want you to play as long as you can, and then when you're done playing, I want you to come coach wherever I'm at." And so I played for 14 years, and then when I got done, true to his word, he called me, and he was with the Colts at the time, and said, you know, "Come on." And I said to him, "Thank you, but you know, can we wait? I need a few years with I do want to coach, but I just feel this pull. My kids are young, and so he was patient, and then 8 years later, he still helped me get my foot in the door. So Bill has believed in me and helped me and supported me every step of the way.
Yeah, he was such a dynamite man to work with too at ESPN. He was awesome. I want to take it through real quick because I know our time is limited, but the coaching journey that you went on, you went on to coach for many years as an assistant, and I want to kind of culminate with a Super Bowl title with the Eagles in 2017. That ultimately is what led you to the Colts to get that first head coaching job. But the faith on that team was so on display. That was the first year I actually started working with Sports Spectrum, and I felt like it was a gift from God with the way all these Eagles players were talking about Jesus, from Carson Wentz to certainly Nick Foles and being the MVP, but Zach Ertz, so many, and even some of the coaches too. Can you take me to that year? I guess you were there 2 years, and what you learned from God, seeing how faith was on display throughout those few years you were there, particularly 2017 for sure.
Yeah, it was a super strong group of players who who were just really committed to their faith, committed to each other, and they were unashamed. And I've always said this about one of the things about pro athletes. If they're going to go in on something, they're normally all in. And so these guys were all in, and it was inspiring. Here I was, I'd been a Christian for a long time. As a player, I was pretty vocal about my faith. And to see these guys living it out on the field and off the field was very inspiring. Guys getting baptized you know, in the training room, the tub in the training room. It was real a spirit there it was on fire. People were on fire for Jesus, and proclaiming the gospel in word and in deed, but doing it the right way. And yeah, those guys, like you said, there's a long list of them.
Yeah. And to win a title, I mean, that's just the ultimate, right? Whether you're a coordinator, head coach, player, whatever it is, to be able to get that championship, it just had to be so cool to watch the season. Because obviously, you can be the biggest man of faith, and the most devout Christian there is. It doesn't guarantee results on the field, but to see it culminate with a title and have that platform must have been so, especially for Nick, who's the one
Yeah.
that obviously connected us. Like Nick Foles, to watch him on display, living out his faith and to play the game of his life. Just from your perspective, that must have been so amazing to see.
It was amazing. And, obviously I'm still close with all those guys, including Nick. And like you said, Jason, it doesn't always work out like that. You thank the Lord for the times it does. And what I've seen over the years, as someone who's tried to be a faithful Christian for all these years in the NFL, through many victories and through many great games and through many disappointing seasons and through getting fired and all of those things that, God is faithful in all of them, and they all have a purpose in our lives and in a bigger purpose in the bigger arena. And I do think that, for instance, in that season in 2017, do I think God had his hand on that team and on Nick Foles in a special way? And Carson Wentz, because of how he played at the beginning of the season, was incredible.
Mm,
Um, but in a special way, yes, I do. And, and then when Nick did what he did, when Nick did, the platform that Nick had and how he used that. Now, dude, how I don't, right, we don't understand how that all works. But what I was encouraged with Nick was I saw the years after that. When he went to Jacksonville and things didn't go perfectly well. Then finally, I was trying to get him to Indianapolis when I was there, and we got him there, and I thought, this is it. The magic's going to happen again. We get Nick and I back together, and we're going to create Matt, and it didn't happen. I got fired.
Yeah.
And I've just learned that God is faithful through all of that, and there's a time and a season, and it is good for us to be humbled, for us to be continually reminded that we can't turn it into a formula. It's not a prosperity gospel. Yes, we will prosper. He says we will prosper, but it's not always the ways that we think. And Nick's story is certainly a great story about that and continues to inspire me.
That's a great reminder. And I was actually going to bring up as we wind down about James 1, right? Which is constantly brought up about considering it joy when you face trials of many kinds. And certainly you faced those trials the last few years as a coach. I wonder, how do you find joy, or were you able to even find joy in the Lord in the midst of all that transpired?
For sure. I mean, it didn't take away the hurt and the disappointment. I mean, the hurt and the disappointment, it was so real. I mean, it hurt more than anything, from a career standpoint, from a personal standpoint. It cuts you deep. I mean, you pour your heart and soul into this and into the relationships and the players. So it hurts, but at the same time, I know God is sovereign. Like, I know this is for my good and his glory. And I know that this isn't the final chapter. It may be the final time I coach, but that's not the final chapter. That's what I love about my relationship with Christ. I was never wanted to be defined by who I was as a player or as a coach. Do I think that's an important part of my life? Absolutely. I wouldn't trade it for anything. I gave my all to those professions, but there's always a bigger picture. There's always a bigger perspective. And that didn't make me less motivated to win games and to win championships. It gave me more motivation. But I also realized that when things don't work out that way, it's just a reminder why we're walking this road that we're walking anyway. And so, that great joy in those trials, but it doesn't mean that you don't experience great pain and heartache as well.
No, and that's the real wrestle, right, as humans, but also understanding how sovereign God is and that he's on the throne and that there's always a plan, but it's living it out that's hard. You mentioned kind of what your thinking is right now as you move forward. What is time like? This will be my last question. What does time with God for you look like today as compared to when you're working those 100 hours as a head coach, or even when you were playing? What does time with the Lord look like now?
Well, it's very sacred to me and very sweet as far as several things. Being in retirement, this is a great thing. For example, I kid with one of my good friends who's a pastor. I think I listen to more sermons online than anybody. I feel like I listen to 5 or 6 a week. You know what I mean? Online. I mean, it's not just Sunday. You know what I mean? I've never been much of a journaler. In fact, I've never journaled here and there, but I am doing a little bit of journaling now. So when I'm doing specifically my Bible reading time, I'm doing some journaling. When I went through seminary and even before seminary, I read a zillion books, and I love reading. But when you're coaching, you just have no time to read. So I try to make Bible reading kind of central. But now I'm starting to reread a couple of the books that I read a long time ago that really moved me, and so I'm rereading some of those. And then lastly, I would say, Jason, I was doing some writing before I got into coaching. I kind of thought about writing a book, and I don't know how the Lord will direct me here, but there were 2 books I was writing. One, the working title was called Created to Compete. The other working title was called Every Play Counts. And they were both about basically the intersection of faith and sports and life. And I've done quite a bit of work on those and got pretty far. And I probably believe at some point here before too long, I feel like I need to finish those books. And if for nothing else, for myself. I probably going to need to finish those books.
That's good. Well, we'll have to get you back on when one of those books releases, and we can help talk about that too. So
no, I appreciate that. That'd be great.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, Frank Reich, thank you so much for coming on the show, and it's great to reconnect here on Sports Spectrum. And we obviously will be praying for you, and we can't wait to see where the Lord directs your next steps. So thanks for coming on the show.
Thanks, Jason.
Hey, thanks for watching Sports Spectrum here on YouTube. You can click our next video, or you can check out our website, sportsspectrum.com.